Good evening, everyone. My name is Beverlyn Elliott, and I am a member of the Board of Trustees of the History Center. It's such a pleasure to welcome all of you here tonight, and as I look out across the crowd, I can just feel the collective enthusiasm and energy for history and for storytelling and the remarkable legacy of David McCullough. I want to take a moment also to express my deepest personal enthusiasm for the David McCullough Archive. For those of us who believe that history is not just dates and names, but also about the stories behind these dates and names, then this is truly a treasure. It offers a tangible connection to the past, and I am thrilled that it is being preserved and made accessible to future generations of scholars and readers. And speaking of storytelling, we have a very special evening planned for you tonight. The program brings together two individuals who are profoundly connected to history and to the McCullough legacy. We are honored to have Andy Masich, a revered historian and also a leader in our cultural community, and of course, the CEO of the History Center, along with Dorie McCullough Lawson, a talented author, and of course, the daughter of David McCullough. So please settle in, put your phones on mute, and let us get inspired. Thank you for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Andy now.
Thank you, Barry. Thanks, everyone, for coming out tonight. This is a very special evening for me. David McCullough was a friend and mentor of mine, and we launched many books here in this very room over the years. And David McCullough was one of the founders of the Modern History Center. He helped shape this institution, not just with bricks and mortar, but with substance, content, tone. And so what you see here today as we celebrate the #1 history museum in America, according to USA, is part of David McCullough's legacy. I'm especially delighted that Dorie is here tonight to help launch the new book, History Matters, based on David McCullough's writings and speeches, and it's David condensed into a fairly slim volume, about 160 pages or so. But Dorie, tell us first, how did this book come about? What's in it?
Well, what's in it? It came about because, my father died 3 years ago, and when someone dies, was a creative person, you have to deal with the intellectual property. And so that includes rights to his work, but it also includes everything in the archives. And so it was a tremendous job that had to be done quickly. Fairly quickly, I thought, to me. And the way that the papers were all stored and kind of organized, but not really, it made it a really almost a Herculean task to do that. As I was working with the papers, his publisher, Simon & Schuster, who had been his publisher for over 50 years, they published every one of his books. He had a wonderful, you hear writers sometimes complaining about their publishers. He never complained. They were fantastic to him all along. And so they knew that I was doing this, and periodically would come to me and say, you're going through the papers, is there a book, is there a book? And I'd say, no, because I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it at all. I said, no, I don't think so.
A lost manuscript or something?
No.
Or they were really angling for, could you tell your
Yes.
father's story?
Is there something here for a book? And I just didn't want to do it. It was painful to do all of this. Plus it was a daunting task. And about a year and a half ago, I don't know which number call came in about, how about a book? I thought, you know what, I should do this, and the 250th anniversary of the country, and it really should be done. And so then I pulled myself together and got to work on it as a book. And partway through that, I also enlisted Mike Hill, who worked as a research assistant for Dad for almost 40 years. And Mike and I have worked many, many years together. And it was wonderful to have him, to have his help, but also to have his company. I worked with my father in a different capacity for 30 years. Mike worked with him for 40. And so for the two of us to be back together working, it was, you know, as if he himself were right in the room with us. And we had a great time putting this book together.
You know, your father was a people person. There's no question about it. And he talked about narrative, history, and biography. Tell us about his view of biography. Why was it important to focus on people, on individuals?
Well, he felt very strongly that history is human, and what is more human than stories about people? He did not like to be bored, and he thought that people and the stories of people were not boring. And he really, that was something that he spoke about a lot, sort of behind the scenes and sometimes publicly, how it was so important for historians and for him not to be boring. Right. And if you ever were working on something and you were writing, he would say, "Are you getting bored writing this?" And he'd say it would show to the reader. So that was part of it. His focus as a writer was narrative. He didn't ever want to do what he called history from on high, which is when you have the advantage of looking back at something from every angle. He wanted to stay right with the characters in his story, and understanding that it was not, they were not living in the past, they were living in their own present, and they didn't know how things were going to turn out any more than we do today. And so he really worked so hard to stay right with what they knew then, and with them not knowing how it was going to turn out.
And so we're discovering it as yes. They are, that sense of immediacy. You mentioned 250th anniversary yes. of the United States. This is a challenging time for our country. We need history, the lessons of history, more now than perhaps ever before, or since the Civil War anyway. But how did your father think about history matters? You know, why does history matter? And he often quoted Daniel Boorstin. What did he say?
Oh, he said that you can't plant cut flowers. Yeah. That we must know history, and to not know our history, not know the history of the country, would be as if you were trying to plant cut flowers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so as we roll into the 250th anniversary of the United States, what would your father say about this time? Would he be optimistic? Would he be pessimistic? Would he say there's some lessons here that we need to take to heart?
Yeah, you have a lot of questions in there. He believed strongly that history teaches us how to behave, that history is a guide to us in perilous times, that history, maybe above all, is a lesson in appreciation, that everything that we have, everything that we care about came about because of the energy, creative drive, efforts, money of people before us. He also thought that history intensified and expanded an individual, our own selves. It expanded our experience of being alive. That why would we restrict ourselves in time the same way why would we restrict ourselves in place? We travel, we want to go to other places. It's human nature to explore. So he didn't think that we should restrict ourselves to our own present time. Look back to see what is there. the question about today, where we are now, I'm asked that a lot. I think about that a lot, but I also want to be very careful to not speak for him, because the tendency would be to say, oh, he would say this and he would say that, but it's really what I want to say, and I'm not going to do that. But he was aware and alive for a lot of, sort of precursor to where we are now. He was very angry. He was very bothered. And he would be, he said he was a short-term pessimist and a long-term optimist. And I think that is how he would look at the time we're in now. He very much liked to quote Winston Churchill when Churchill said, "We haven't journeyed this far because we're made of sugar candy." And I think that those kinds of things he would return to, and he had a strong belief, core belief. It was completely who he was, that we are a good people, and he had a lot of faith in that we are a good people who want to do the right thing. And I think he would rely on that now a lot.
One of the things that always struck me about your father was his versatility and his ability to present to people. When he was a boy, either at Linden School in Squirrel Hill or at Shadyside Academy, he couldn't decide what he wanted to be when he grew up. What were some of the things he considered?
He considered being an architect, a painter. He was very interested in being a painter. He loved acting, and the arts were hugely important to him, and I think that it started at the Linden School. Yeah. And one of his teachers taught the class how to do two-point perspective. Mm-hmm. And he said it was as if she had levitated the table. It was the most magical thing he'd ever seen. He couldn't believe it. And he studied art at Shadyside, and he studied art and painting quite seriously at Yale, and really thought that he might want to be a painter.
He also thought he might be a writer.
He thought he might be a writer, but he didn't talk a lot about that, how he thought he might be a writer. It felt more like he kept that, in his younger years, more to himself. Mm-hmm. But I think that was secretly what he always wanted to do.
And the thing about his creativity, his artistic flair, is that those are all tools in the kit of a public historian. Speaking, writing, art, and he was the whole package. He was the real deal. Did he have to work at it, or was he just a natural?
It's a good question. He worked hard at everything. And he felt that very much came from his Pittsburgh upbringing, that we work, and we work all the time. Yeah, we're always working. And what are you doing make yourself useful. That was a line that his mother said often to him, and he would say to us, make yourself useful. That was really important, to be useful. So he was working at things all the time. But he did have a natural proclivity to be a performer. I mean, he was a performer on stage, and he loved it. Mm-hmm. The writing he was working at all the time.
There's a lot of discipline that goes into writing. Tell us about his day. Writing day.
Yeah, I was talking about this with one of my brothers recently, and my brother described him as being in his office, which is a little building at the back of our yard, 8 feet by 12 feet. And it was the property is like the shape of a shoebox, with the house at the front and his office way at the back. And he would, my brother said, he was out there like a locomotive every day. This one-man locomotive in that little office. And he would go out early in the morning, 8 o'clock, not overly early, but sort of a normal time, go out at 8 o'clock. He had no computer, no telephone. in the olden days, he had a wood stove, but then eventually he got electric heat in the building. And no one really was to go out there unless it was something really, really important. He came in at lunch to check what phone calls may have come in and the mail, and to eat. He loved to eat, and he was not going to miss a meal. So he came in for lunch, then went back out until dinner time, and he did it every day. Sometimes Sunday would be a shorter day, but he worked every day. And when he was a young man in New York, working at Time Inc., he thought that he might want to be a writer. And he was at an event with a friend who knew that he might want to be a writer. And there was a writer there named Henry Sinclair Drago. And this friend said to Dad, "You see that man over there? He's written more than 100 books." And Dad couldn't believe it. And he went over to Mr. Drago and he waited in line, and he got up to him and he said, "My friend tells me that you've written over 100 books. How do you do that?" And he said, 4 pages a day. And Dad took that so to heart that he wrote 4 pages a day for the rest of his time. His first book, The Johnstown Flood, he wrote when he was still working in New York, and he wrote it at night and on the weekends. So that book, he allowed himself 2 pages a day. And then he wrote The Pioneers when he was in his mid-80s. And he decided that in his mid-80s, 12 books, he maybe could get away with 3 pages a day. He didn't have to do 4 then. So he was doing 2 to 4 at that time. But he was very, very disciplined. And if he came in and had a 5-page day, boy, was he thrilled.
Yeah, right. Ahead of the game.
Yeah.
You know, he once told me, I asked him how long was he going to keep working, and, when should I retire? And he said, look, Andy, watch your weight and never retire. So that's the key to success or a long life. Never retire. And I think that he also said that some of his best work was done after age 65.
He did say that, and he was very interested, and I read now some of the studies about cognition, and I think that he would love to read these about the way that our ability to think changes. And I think that we can do calculations quicker when we're younger, but then we have a different kind of pattern recognition later in life. He talked about that without knowing any of these studies about his own head. And he was very interested in that. And he felt that into his 60s and beyond, that he didn't feel that he quite had the stamina or the speed, but he was better and he could see things better. And he was very interested in that. He was interested in everything. He was interested in everything. He was interested in birds and in dogs and architecture and painting and dance and music and lyrics, and how little children learn. He was fascinated by that.
You mentioned in his office,
Yes.
which I think most of you have probably seen pictures of this thing. It looks like an overblown outhouse out there in the garden. And I sat in there with him once, and I said, well, why did you build it this size? And he rolled back on his chair, and there were bookshelves here, and there were bookshelves here, and there were bookshelves over his desk here. He said, this is why. And he reached and pulled a book off, and he reached and pulled a book off. He didn't have to go any, but he didn't have to get out of his chair to get these. And it was this kind of intimate little space. But there on the desk, which was kind of a board on a couple of file cabinets,
Yes.
Was this typewriter. Tell me about that typewriter. You mentioned that there was a time when he got electric heating in the office, but he never had an electric typewriter, did he?
No. Somebody bought him, he and Mom bought one once, and he tried it for maybe 7 minutes and then gave up on it. And it had that you could put in a different ribbon and then go backwards and erase 7 letters or something. And he just thought, oh, forget this is awful. The typewriter he bought in 1965 used for $25, and
Royal.
a Royal Standard typewriter. He wrote everything he wrote on it. He didn't know how to type, really. I mean, he typed with four fingers, two on each, and banged loudly. He loved the banging and the sort of physicality of it. He loved that lever, to turn it. He loved the ding at the end of the line. He used a certain kind of paper, and it's called yellow second sheets, which is it's yellow paper that is like newsprint. It's very thin and soft. And there was a time when that paper was very hard to find, and we had an office supplies store near us that were terrific about always being able to find him those second sheets. And he really was worried when he wasn't going to have the right kind of paper. I think it was in the 1980s. And Denny DeRosa was the man at that office supply store who gave the typewriter its, as he called it, his every 50,000-mile tune-up. And Dad was not mechanical. If the sink was leaking, or my mother was the one under there with the wrench and she was fixing it, he was not. And but he did. One time the typewriter broke and Denny DeRosa was away. Uh-oh. And I mean, that is, really a big deal. And he himself fixed it with a rubber band. And somehow it worked for about 2 weeks until Denny returned and could actually fix it. So he didn't lose time then. And all of this was happening on Martha's Vineyard, which is where they moved in 1972. To live year round, which was really when he was getting going, writing full time. And not so much now, but in those days we lost power a lot. The electricity went out often. And he loved that too, because he never noticed. He'd just sail through his day. He'd come in and we'd all be sad because we couldn't watch Gilligan's Island or whatever. And he said, "Oh, I didn't even know it went out." Yeah. So the typewriter, he loved the typewriter, and he loved, with little kids particularly, to say that he thought the typewriter was actually writing the books.
Well, the typewriter is right over there in that case. And that is part of the David McCullough archive now here at the History Center. And you can see some of that yellow
second
paper,
sheets, yeah.
Second sheets, some of the manuscripts there with his annotations on it.
So he would work on the yellow pages, and my sister called them wrong pages, he would crumple them up and throw them in the garbage can. And if he had a big day, there were a lot of wrong pages. He'd bring them in at night, and in the morning before breakfast, so before he ever went out to the office, he would be awake before anybody got up, and he would be sitting in the living room every morning doing what you can see on those pages over there, crossing out, changing things. And there would be, he liked to say that he didn't think of himself as a writer, he thought of himself as a rewriter. And the rewriting, which is also in all of this collection that is here now, the manuscripts went through draft after draft after draft, and they stayed on second sheets. There was no set amount, but several drafts would be on the second sheets, and then the paper changes, and then he goes to a fancier paper, which also gave a sense of how he was progressing. Yeah.
You mentioned your mother as the mechanic, but he often mentioned that she was the editor-in-chief and the chairman of the ethics committee. What did he mean by that?
Yeah, Secretary of the Treasury, too.
Oh, Secretary.
Yes. She did everything, and he appreciated it completely. And she was all of those things. The ethics committee, I would say, rarely were things, they were sort of more family overall ways of behaving, and did he have the right tone in a letter to somebody? There was a time this isn't quite ethics, but this would be the kind of direction. And this was a story that they told when he was a young man in New York. His boss at Time Inc. asked him to write a speech for the boss to give at a big event. And Dad wrote the speech. And it went over very well. And everybody was happy, and he was happy. And he came home and told Mom how well it went. And she said, terrific, and wasn't that terrific? And about 2 weeks or 3 weeks later, the boss came again and asked him to write another speech because it went so well. And he came home and told Mom, and she said, you tell him, if you write him, you give him. So from then on, he didn't write speeches for other people. If you're going to write such a good speech, you better be the one to give it. So that kind of thing she did. But the chairman, the editor-in-chief, I'd love to talk about that a little bit. She, in many ways, I feel now, and he was writing for her all the time. And she not only read everything he wrote, and when he would write, so say he was writing Truman, he would write chapter 1, and then he would write chapter 2, and then before he started chapter 3, he'd go back and write 1 and 2 over, and then 3, and then go back and write them over, and then 4. She read everything and commented in very light pencil. You'll see them in the papers, and it will be sometimes just a little check mark, which means she was going to say something to him about it. And she also, not only did she read everything, she read everything aloud to him.
Yes.
He wanted to write for the eye, but also for the ear. And the only way that he could tell if he was writing well for the ear was if she read it to him. And, Truman is 1,000 pages, and those were long days when she was reading to him, for all of us, too. The reading time went on and on and on. And there's a story that is in History Matters that he tells, that one time when he was working on Mornings on Horseback, she was reading to him, and she got to a sentence, and she said, there's something wrong with that sentence. And he said, no, there isn't. And she said, yeah, I think there's something wrong with the sentence. He said, read it to me again. She read it again, and he said, no, there's nothing wrong with it. And she said, I think there is. And he said, oh, give it to me. And then he read it out loud, and he said, see, there's nothing wrong with that sentence. And she said, okay, and they went on. So the book was published, and there was a review of Mornings on Horseback in the New York Review of Books by Gore Vidal. And he said that this is a wonderful early life biography of Theodore Roosevelt and had lots of nice things to say about it. And he said, but sometimes McCullough is a bit convoluted in his writing. Take, for example, this sentence. And it was the sentence. Yeah, it was the sentence. And another part that I love about that story is she never told it. She never told that story. And he loved telling that story and giving her all credit. And she never was taking it and showing how smart she was. But she did everything. She was with him all the time. She kept everything going for him, and he literally couldn't have done what he did without her.
And he would often say that.
Yes. So he was completely appreciative of it, and he was chasing her. And, their romance was like he was chasing her all the 67 years of their marriage, and their at their anniversary each year, she said every year she only signed up for 1 year at a time. And so, we would hear about other people's anniversaries, and they're getting cards and flowers and all that. And Mom and Dad were hilarious about it because he would come down in the morning and say, today is the day. I don't know if she's going to sign. I don't know if she's going to sign. And it would go on. Sometimes she would sign up early in the day. Sometimes it would go all day. Yeah. And then he'd, jump up and down and say, she did it. We're on for another year. And it was a great lesson also in that everybody doesn't have to be the same. You can do things differently. It doesn't have to be red roses. Your anniversary can be hilarious.
She was a great dancer. She
Great
was
dancer.
so light on her feet. And I remember when we celebrated your father's 80th birthday, I think it was here. I think that was the same year that the 16th Street Bridge was renamed the David McCullough Bridge. And we had a party right here at the History Center. But he had a broken foot or something. He was in like an air cast or something. And he was still dancing all night. And Rosalie was her feet never touched the ground. They were a great couple and a great dancing couple.
They were very good dancing couple, and they loved to dance. What people didn't know is that she was always leading, always. And he would have trouble dancing with other people because she was telling him what to do. Yeah. And he said about that, that he thought it was a great metaphor for life, that he was out there getting the attention and he was doing what he was doing, but she was leading him.
Well, he often spoke of Pittsburgh so fondly, and growing up, going to the Linden School, Glen Arden is where their house was, 549.
549, yeah.
And then Shadyside Academy. But he would often say that he believed that Pittsburgh was the essential American city. What did he mean by that, do you think?
Well, as I say, he loved work, and he loved that Pittsburgh was such a producing city, making things, and he was so proud of that. And then he was so proud of the transformation that Pittsburgh made, and the interest in education, the interest in the arts, that it's a city that feels a little bit Midwestern, it feels Eastern, he thought it was fantastic. He loved Pittsburgh, he loved being from Pittsburgh, and his people were from Pittsburgh, both sides,
Right.
all the way back. I mean, everybody was in Pittsburgh.
And if you could understand Pittsburgh, you could understand the American
Yes.
experience.
Yes.
And I really, I think that's why he believed in this place so much. He really felt that we had something to offer, not just the people of Pittsburgh, but the people of America here. Well, I think that there are people in his book, in your book, that is often in his words, that inspired him or that helped shape him or influence him. Well, who are some of the people that you write about in?
Well, his teachers here at Linden School and at Shadyside, Lowell Innes, Walter Jones, and his professors that he had at Yale were hugely influential on him. And the book is organized in a way that at the beginning of the book is about why history. And then it moves into people, characters in history that were important to him, Truman, George Washington, and then it moves into people who personally were influences on him. And in this, what we have here is Vincent Scully and the writer Paul Horgan, Herman Wouk. And then the end of the book is about writing. And we talked about this a little bit earlier about what he wanted to be. He thought of himself as a writer with history as his subject. And whenever he was going to do an event or something and they would say, what is his title? He didn't say historian. He always said writer or author. And so being a writer was hugely important to him. Yeah. And he loved writers. Thornton Wilder was very instrumental in being an influence. And Paul Horgan was a person who said that if history isn't literature, it's going to be forgotten. So that if you're going to be writing about history, also make it literature.
He often said, I think I remember him saying on several occasions, that, yeah, I could write fiction, but the stories in history are just so good that
Right.
I don't think I could improve much on them. So why not use real historical subjects and characters?
Yes.
He loved the characters.
Loved the characters, and he did have ideas for novels, and he would work on them a little bit, but he would always return to history. He had ideas for a play. He loved stories of all kinds, but history was what
Yeah.
thrilled him.
There are parts of this book that you especially like, or that you think reflect the book. Would you mind reading something from the book that you think is
Oh, sure.
special?
Yeah, I will do that. This book, there was some thought, I think, that, there might be something in the papers to just dust off and publish, which obviously we weren't going to do.
Right.
And we were looking for things that hadn't been published or had been published for very small audiences. And then Mike and I particularly wanted to give more David McCullough, just a sense of him and the feeling that we all had sitting and having dinner with him or having coffee on the back porch. But who was he? And I really wanted to show his creative drive and the power of his mind. I mean, honestly, it's overused, I think, but I think he truly was a genius. I mean, that mind was a locomotive. And this that I'd love to read was from a commencement address that he gave. He was 85 years old when he gave this commencement address in 2018. And I just love this. Be generous, give of yourselves. Count kindness as all important in life. Take interest in those around you. Try to keep in mind that everyone you encounter along the way, no matter their background or station in life, knows something you don't. Get in the habit of asking people about themselves, their lives, their interests, and listen to them. It's amazing what you can learn by listening. Remember that speaking the truth, loyalty, decency, courage, and character all count. They all matter greatly still, indeed, count more now than ever. We as a nation are experiencing serious bumps in the road. Don't get discouraged. Don't give up. There's work to be done. Let's never lapse into being spectators only. If you're going to ring the bell, give that rope one hell of a pull.
That's great. Dorie, we wanted to leave enough time to talk with the audience.
Great.
Most of you have read many books of David McCullough's. Most of you have seen him in person, spoken with him, had your own experiences with him. So in a way, this is sort of a family reunion. And I'd like to hear some of your questions, and we'll spend the next 15 minutes or so hearing what you have to say, or questions for Dorie. No monologues from the audience. We need to hear from Dorie. So let's take some questions. Let's start right here.
Question always fascinating with the work that your father did. I mean, take a book, and he's working on it for 10 years, going there too. But once he starts, it goes down that road. Is he also thinking about the next book after that? How is he supporting the family while he's doing this, going up? I mean, what was that type of a process for the family?
Andy, will you just repeat the question?
Sure.
For the audience?
The question is about the process when he was working on one book. Was he thinking about the next book? How did he support the family? What was that all like? Excellent question. Supporting the family was a huge obstacle and struggle. My parents were not people who had trust funds and anything backing them up for everyone to live. And he left his job in New York when he was about 37 years old, and it was a big risk. This is something I discovered in the papers too, is how well he was doing. He was soaring in New York in the publishing industry, in the magazine industry, and he was being recognized as somebody of note as a young man, and he left it. It was really 20 years of lean times. And when Andy was talking about the little office, I was thinking, he didn't mention that an 8 by 12 office would not be very expensive to build. And that might have been a lot of the reason that it was that small. It was just to get him out of the house, away from all of us. There are 5 children. When he was working, so that was, he would get advances on books, and they would, the Path Between the Seas, for example, ended up taking him 7 years. And the advance ran out. They ran out of money. And Mom went out to the office. That was a time to go out and interrupt him and say, we literally have run out of money. And what are we going to do? And he said, I'm in the middle of this. I'm past my deadline. I can't stop. I don't know what we're going to do. And she went down to the bank in our town. And this is just such a story about the differences of local banking and what it was like. And she went down, and the man the president of the bank was a man named Bill Honey. And everyone liked to talk about, Mr. Honey has the money. And she went down to see Mr. Honey, and she got an appointment with him, and she went in, and she said, my husband's been writing this book. And everybody knew in our town that he was working all the time. And we didn't have anything extravagant. We weren't going on trips, and we didn't have new cars, and everyone knew he was working. And she went into Mr. Honey, and she told him the situation. He'd run out of money, and the book was taking longer, and they had to pay the heat and everything. And he said, how much do you need, Rosalie? And that was it. And the bank just, gave them the money to cover their bills for the next 2 years for him to finish the book. And I found his writing was very, very bold. You see, he had big, strong handwriting. And there's a little card that I found in the papers with meek little writing from the 70s, and it's very little. And it was all the kids and all the tuitions he was going to have to pay for colleges, and wondering how the heck is he going to do it. And he did it, and he underestimated how much college was going to cost for everybody. But so he would take on, he would write articles for magazines to get some extra money. And that went on, I would say, until off and on. There were lean times all the way up until Truman was published. And then it got better. Then it steadied out. But that was 20 years. And we were all grown up by then. I'm the youngest, and I was, in my 20s by then. Working on a book, he was so concentrated on the book that he was working on at the time that I think he would have small ideas, inklings of ideas of what he might do next, but he really was focused on the book. And he was an idea factory. I think when he died, a couple of years before he died, he had a running list of books he wanted to write, including a book about Pittsburgh. And I think there were 27 books on it. He had a lot of ideas.
Well, and it wasn't just writing. The American experience and
Yes.
his television career, his voiceover career, the Civil War.
Right.
All of America fell in love with his voice, and so there were distractions from just pure writing in his office.
Yes. And the television, it was really a lot of tension for him internally between the television and writing, because the television took away from the writing, but it was helping a lot of other things, and he loved it. He loved everything. He was like Theodore Roosevelt, wanting to be the bride at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral. I mean, he loved everything.
Other questions?
All right.
Let's
Yeah.
just
I see a couple hands.
better than I.
My name's Jessica. My colleague, Zach. Zach, you can go ahead. We both have microphones, and so we'll be coming around just so everyone can hear the question. I'll come to you next.
Yeah. So I have a very deep and profound respect for your father. And just to share, my wife recently shared that we were having a boy, and one of the first things I thought about was history, history, history. The boy must read history, what he often quoted about Abigail Adams. And he was such a good speechwriter, thinking back to his speech to Congress at the 200-year anniversary and how poetic those speeches were. Could you share any personal speeches that he might have given to the family, maybe at a daughter's wedding or anything to that effect?
Well, I can't give the speech, but he spoke all the time. Toasting is a huge part of our family, and a lot of times there'll be events and dinners, normal dinners, even that there's no talking, it's only toasting. And he spoke at every occasion. He spoke at many, our weddings, funerals, all kinds of places, and he was available, in our little town or to come here. And it was amazing to see him speak because he got up and he did it extemporaneously most of the time. And sometimes he would write speeches, but most of them he was delivering off the cuff, really. And I remember sitting in the audience many times and thinking, oh my gosh, where is he going with this? And he would bring it around. He was a master at it, and he knew just what he was doing. And he said what he would do is he knew where he was going to begin, and he knew where he was ending. And other than that, he felt like he had a basket of, like he was Santa with a basket of presents, and he was just going to pick different things out, and that was the middle, and then the end. But he could do it.
That's a great story. And Christmas time in your family was special. What was the most often given present?
It's Merry Book Christmas.
Merry Book.
Always, every year, it's Merry Book Christmas, and there is a piece in here about books at Christmas.
Books
in the
that
book.
he received and books that he gave, and that's one of the things I think it's one of the later chapters in the book about what influenced him, what you should read, or
Yes.
great books. And so if you're looking for a reading list, you'll find it right here.
And he believed very strongly that what we read is part of what makes us who we are. And so it's very important that you're reading all the time, reading good things. And also is important for him, and the Adams book is where he really took this very seriously, to understand the characters in history if you believe that reading makes you who you are, that it was imperative that he read what they were reading. So he was reading, and he'd never been in the 18th century before until he did the Adams book, and he spent all of his time reading the plays and the novels that they were reading.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes, I was wondering, did he disguise your vacations as just research trips, or were you brought along for these research trips?
I was just going to say, well, which vacations are you talking about? Those were we would come to Pittsburgh to visit grandparents and aunts and uncles, but all other trips were work related, and they were not always all of us. Some would go on a trip with him, and some would not, and it depended on the age and the appropriateness of it, and if who was going to. There was a trip to Panama in the 1970s, and this was in the lean times, and he had to get down to Panama, and he wanted my mother to go, but she couldn't because of all these kids, and she said, take these two boys. So he went for 3 weeks to Panama, and she sent him off with an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old. Said, you're taking them.
His sense of humor and whimsy is one of the endearing things I found. We did an exhibit here called Clash of Empires. It was about the French and Indian War, and we borrowed things from museums all over the world. And one of the things we brought from Canada back to Pittsburgh was the confession that George Washington signed as a 22-year-old at Fort Necessity in 1754. And this is the first time it had been back on this soil in 250 years. And we were all wearing our white gloves in the conservation lab. And he looked around and he saw that the curators weren't watching. And he slipped his little finger out of the glove so he could touch George Washington's signature. Just, to touch that history. But he was a character.
Well, I think one thing that I think people often don't know if they didn't have time with him personally is how funny he was. He was very, very funny, and humor was a huge part of every single day for him, for them both. They were hilarious.
Who's next?
Zach is going to take our next question on that side of the room.
Thanks for being here. This is really a wonderful program for our city. And I'm just wondering if you could speak a bit more to your father's research process. You talked about the reading of the books and the plays of the time, but how would he organize his thoughts around his characters and dive, I'm sure, very deeply into the research that then is on the pages?
I love to talk about that. He would begin, and this I think comes to your question too. He would begin by reading secondary sources, books about a subject, for a long time. Day and night. His sort of, you'd think he was reading for pleasure. He would be reading the books written about the topic. Then he went into the primary sources, and he was very creative in what he was looking for when he was researching. Many writers either approach it this way or think about it this way, that they will do the research and then they write. And he didn't do it that way. He researched and he wrote, and he researched and he wrote. And he learned what he needed to find out. The writing helped him learn what he needed to find out. And he also wanted to write for the 5 senses. So that would make him be somewhat creative in finding out what they were, what the weather was, what they were eating, what their, finances were and the worries. And in looking for where his papers were going to go, some institutions sometimes would tell me what researchers want. Researchers want this. And that, Andy never says anything like that. That turned me away completely, because who knows what researchers are going to want? And he often wanted things that archivists would say to him, I've worked here for 20 years, I've worked here for 30 years. No one's ever asked that question or to see something like that. So he was very creative in that. Something else that he did, which is he would go to the places where things happened. So there's a scene where Truman finds out that Franklin Roosevelt had died, and he ran through the Capitol building. And Dad wanted to do that. And he got the permission of the historian of the Capitol building, Richard Baker, arranged for him to be able to do that. And he wanted to wear the same kind of shoe, not the same brand, but the same feeling of shoes even that Truman wore, slippery, and what would that be like? And so he ran the length of the Capitol, he ran up the stairs, and he learned a lot from that. One thing that he said was Truman was in good shape. That was good. But what I find very interesting, I think many historians, and it makes sense, many historians, many writers would go to the place that you're writing about. But what he did was he went to the place after he had written about it. He'd write about it first, and then he would go to find out what he got wrong. And I love that just as an attitude and an approach to all kinds of things, that we should be looking for what we've gotten wrong and assuming we've gotten things wrong, because we always do. And let me find out what I've gotten wrong and let me fix it.
Do we have time for 1 or 2 more questions?
Yeah, I would definitely say 2 more. I think we're
let's say
good.
2 more, because I know a number of you want to get a book, and Dorie has graciously agreed to sign them over there on that table right there, immediately following our conversation. And those of you who haven't had an opportunity to see some of the treasures in that case over there, please take advantage of this. There are Pulitzer Prizes and Presidential Medals of Freedom, but there are also the real treasures, which are the manuscripts with David McCullough and Rosalie's annotations and marginalia there, and the manual royal typewriter, all part of the David McCullough archive here at the History Center.
All right, Dorie, we have your next question here. And then if folks on that side of the room could show their hands if they have a question, Zach will select one of the last ones.
Hi, I wanted to try to pull together just a few little threads of what you said about your dad tonight in relating an incident that you were involved in, but you were a child, and I also was involved in. And the themes that I see are his love of Pittsburgh, his love of narrative, his belief that we are fundamentally a good people. And I think the incident that I'll describe real briefly shows that he himself was a good person. And the incident involved a trip in 1972 when my husband and I, along with our 14-month-old son, decided to camp out on Martha's Vineyard and put 2 bikes on the back of the car and got ready for our adventure, not knowing a whole lot about where this campsite was. So the ferry had already left to go back to the mainland, and we were driving around in the dark when a car behind us blinked its lights, and we pulled over. And a gentleman got out and said, "I noticed your Pennsylvania license. Are you lost?" We said, "We are so lost." So he said, "Hold on." He went back to the car and spoke with your mom and came back and said, "You are welcome to camp in our backyard." But by the time
people.
yes, oh, you remember it? Oh, we don't know who you were. Oh my goodness. Well, so what happened was we got to the yard and it was raining, and your mom said, "You cannot camp in the rain. Come inside." So we stayed in your house and were welcomed as if we were family. And on the shelf was a huge manuscript of the book on the Brooklyn Bridge, I believe. And then at some point, you and some of your siblings came down the steps, and it seemed to me that you all had long blonde hair and farmer's overalls on. And then the next day, we were up, had breakfast, and were sent off. And your mom was the loveliest person in the whole world. She communicated with me over the years since then. And I have always thought that his interest in going from the abstract, the simply historical facts, to the personal is shown in that sort of thing. And I'm forever grateful. I'm so happy to meet you.
Thank you so much for telling that story. I am thrilled to hear that story. I was 3 years old, and I don't remember it, but my siblings all remember it very well. And just recently, I would say in the last 3 months, one of my brothers said, "Remember that time he invited the people to stay overnight?" So I'm thrilled that you're here, and thank you for telling that story.
Question on this back.
Andy, Zach has the last one right over here.
Oh,
I'm curious as to how he landed on Martha's Vineyard and if he ever considered writing about it. And I heard that story about 20 years ago.
He landed on Martha's Vineyard because he met my mother. And she came to, right after she graduated from high school. She was 18, he was 17. She came to Pittsburgh to visit a friend who she'd gone to boarding school with. And there was a party at the Rolling Rock Club, and my mother and father were set on a blind date. And that was in June of 1951. And she said to him that she lived on Martha's Vineyard, and had he ever heard of it? He said, "Oh yeah, I know that." And he went home and looked at a map. He had no idea what it was. And he saw that it was an island, and I think he'd never seen the ocean. And she said, you should come, when at the date, she said, you should come visit me at Martha's Vineyard. And that was it. And so he went and looked and saw that it was an island and decided he was definitely going to come visit her. So he came to visit her in July, right after he met her. And that's how he ended up there. We ended up living there because they had bought a house, when he was working in New York, they bought a rundown house in 1965 for $14,000 furnished. And when he wanted to become a writer full time, he said, we're going to have to sell that house so that I can do this. And she said, if you sell that house, you might as well cut off my right arm. And he said, okay, well, if we don't sell it, we have to live in it. And so that's what we did. They put heat in it, and we moved there full time, and that's how it happened. And he did not write about it. He was thrilled when places would show up in his books. Like Pittsburgh would come into play, like in the Wright brothers. The aluminum something was made in Pittsburgh, and the engine block. I didn't write the book. I was thrilled when that happened. John Adams was a circuit judge, and he came to Martha's Vineyard was on his route in his circuit. So he loved when places showed up. But he didn't write specifically about Martha's Vineyard, except for the very first thing he ever had published was an article that he wrote after visiting my grandparents there. There's a Methodist campground with gingerbread architecture, and it was sort of an architectural piece, and it was published in a magazine, and that was the first thing he ever published, but he didn't write about Martha's Vineyard again. He felt it got enough attention. It didn't need him.
He would often tell the story about the Johnstown flood, how that got started. Did he? I'm sure he regaled you with the story when he was a boy.
The peas? Yes. And we all did it too. Yes. The only thing, he said he didn't know anything about the Johnstown flood except at dinner, if you had mashed potatoes, you made a divot with your spoon into the mashed potatoes and you pour the gravy in and then take your fork and pull off the side so the gravy would go out, and you say, the Johnstown flood. Flood the peas. Flooding the peas. Yes, and that's all he knew about the Johnstown flood.
And that became his first book.
Yeah.
It was the book that he had always wanted to read.
Yes.
Was
Once he saw photographs of the destruction of the flood at the Library of Congress. They had a display of photographs of the destruction of the flood, and he thought, what is this? And oh my gosh, it's the Johnstown flood. And he's imagining the mashed potatoes and the peas. And that's how he got interested in reading about it and learning what it really was.
Well, Dorie, this has been delightful talking about your father, your book, and it is altogether fitting and proper that we talk history today. It's the anniversary of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address today. And I just want to thank you for coming to Pittsburgh and being with us, and your willingness to sign books. That's the icing on the cake.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. I'm thrilled to be here.